Thank you for joining me in the fourth section of this Sicha from Parshas Beshalach, Tafshin Nun Beis, where the Rebbe is teaching us about the superiority of the Jewish women in connection with the Geulah, and specifically in connection to the time of Yud Shvat, the passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the mimer that he dedicated to that day, and we are seeing this connection also in the Parsha of the time. We spoke about last week, in the last section, we spoke about Parshas Beshalach, Parshas Bai, and the connection with the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And now we are talking about the superiority. In this section, Daled, we are going to learn about the advantage of the Jewish women in bringing the Geulah, specifically from Parshas Beshalach. It's interesting also that very often Yod Shvat falls out in the week of Parshas Beshalach, and even if not, Yod Gimel Shvat will fall out in the week of Parshas Beshalach, and Yod Gimel Shvat is the day that the second part of the mimer of Basi Lagani that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe dedicated for Yod Shvat, and in honor of his mother and grandmother, was that second part of the mimer was dedicated for Yod Gimel Shvat, which also falls out in the week of Parshas Beshalach. So in Parshas Beshalach, we learn about the song of praise that the Jewish people sang after they crossed the Yam Suf, the Red Sea. And there in Parak Tesvav, we have Az Yasher Moshe V'nei Yisrael Hashir Hazais, the Moshe and the Yidden sang the song of praise. And afterwards, we have the song of the women in Pasuk Chaf and Chaf Aleph. Batikach Miriam Hanavia Achas Aaron Es Hatayf Biyadeha Batetzena Kol Hanashim Achareha Batupim L'Choles Batan Lahem Miriam Shir LaHashem. So we have here the Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took instrument in her hand, and she went out. All the women went out after her with instruments and dancing, and Miriam led them in song. Shir LaHashem, praise to Hashem. So here we see an additional aspect by the women's shira, by their song, that they also had instruments and dancing, which expressed that their praise for Hashem was in an even greater way than by the men. The Rebbe points out also in a footnote that the women sang even before the angels, and the angels listened to their song. It says in Tehillim, Kapitel Samach Ches, Pasuk Chavav, chapter 68, verse 26. Kidmu sharim achar noignim b'saich alamais teifeifais, which means the singers began, then the musicians, in the midst of maidens playing timbrels. In Shemais Rabbah, Medrash explains Kadmu Shirim, this is referring to the song of the men. Achar Noignim refers to the praise of the angels. B'saich alamais teifeifais, this is the woman who sang in between the men and the angels. And it brings Yalkut Shemaini has different opinions, but he brings a Medrash. The angels asked Hashem, when can we sing your praise? And Hashem said, Az Yasher Moshe. First Moshe will sing. And then the angel said, okay, now can we sing? And Hashem said, and they asked, do we have to wait for the women to sing? And Hashem said, absolutely, yes, you must wait for the women. And this also is implied by the words in Shir HaShirim from this pasuk of that the mimer, the second half of the mimer Basi Lagani, which starts with the pasuk Hayosheves Beganim. That pasuk ends off Chaver Makshivim L'Kailech, friends listening to your voice, which refers to the angels listening to the voice of the women of the praise that they were giving Hashem. So here we see again how a certain quality and advantage of the women's song, that even the angels had to wait and listen to them. So the fact that the women were singing their praise of Hashem for Kriyas Yamsuf with instruments and dancing shows us a greater joy that they had, something more special about their praise for Hashem than of the men. And why did they have this? So Rashi explains that the fact that they brought instruments with them out of Mitzrayim, that they had with them in their hands instruments, shows that they were so certain that Hashem would do nisim for them that they specifically made sure to have these instruments with them to take them out of Mitzrayim. So why did they have this extra joy and make sure to bring these instruments with them? Why did they have such a greater anticipation for the redemption, more so than the men? So in order to understand this, so first the Rebbe references in a footnote to a Sicha from Chelek Aleph, page 139, where the Rebbe gives another explanation different to the one that he's going to bring in here, which is a little bit more, I would say, Gulistic. It's a little bit more on focusing on the hardship aspect. And then in this Sicha, the Rebbe brings up something a little bit more, an explanation which is a lot more empowering and also gives us a lesson for us in our times. So just to preface with the explanation the Rebbe references to from Chelek, Lakotei Sichas Chelek Aleph, page 139, the Rebbe explains it's obvious that you can't compare a feeling of joy that comes from something that you did not work for and didn't put much effort and toil into to the joy that comes after a lot of effort, toil, and pain. Right, we know from Perkei Avos, Lefum Tzara Agra. According to the pain is the reward. So when the Yidden were come after Kriyas Yamsuf, when the men were singing their song, they had come out of Mitzrayim, but they did not feel the same degree of joy as the women, because the women went through a unique difficulty in Mitzrayim that the men didn't experience to the same degree, and therefore they had a greater simcha. What was that? The hardship of Mitzrayim was increased, and one of the worst decrees that came about just after Miriam was born was the decree that Paro gave, Kol haben hayoled hayair tishlachuhu, that any boy that is born should be thrown into the river. And this was much harder. This decree was much more difficult than all the hard work of making bricks and building buildings and the work in the field. All the backbreaking work could not compare to the difficulty and hardship of the women, going through the whole experience of carrying a child and bearing a child and having that child being thrown into the river, and this such an experience challenges the mother much more so than the father, and therefore when they were freed and they saw that Paro and all his awful decrees were gone, and the woman had so much of a greater joy because they went through that difficulty in a greater way. So this is all one way of explaining the greater joy of the women, and the Rebbe in this Sicha is going to teach us another explanation which is much more empowering and gives us a lesson for us in our times as well. It says in the Midrash, Shir HaShirim, and in Shemais Rabbah, Miriam al Shem HaMirror. The Miriam was called her name Miriam because of the bitterness of the Shibud Mitzrayim, of the work of Mitzrayim, which the hard work of Mitzrayim started specifically after Miriam was born, 86 years before they left Mitzrayim, before Yetzias Mitzrayim, which was 4 years before Moshe was born. And interestingly, the Rebbe points out that 86 is the gematria of the name of Hashem Elokim, which is the name of Hashem that brings about concealment. So that was 86 years before Yetzias Mitzrayim, before the Jewish people left Mitzrayim. That's when the intense bitterness of the Geulah began. And after this, and because of this, it says Ha'emid HaKadosh Baruch Hu Goel Zu Miriam, that Hashem established this Redeemer, Miriam. There were three Gezeres and 3 Redeemers. Vayimaru es Chayehem, that was the bitter, the workload became much harder, that their lives became bitter, and that is the redeemer in connection with that decree was Miriam. In Benhu Hamtinoisai, that's the decree that Parah gave to Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra and Pua, the midwives, that if a boy is born, they should kill the child, which of course they didn't do, and that the redeemer connected to that decree was Aharon, which is connected to the word Hira'in, pregnancy, and Kol haben hayar tishlachuhu, that any baby boy should be thrown into the river. That decree was connected with the Moshe as the redeemer, Moshe, whose name is also connected to the water, as it says, Min hamayim shisihu, from the water she drew him. So Miriam is one of the redeemers connected to Veimaras Chayehem. So we say it's interesting to point out that this decree of that Parah brought about, this bitter gullus and hard work, was specifically in order to decrease their progeny, that the Jewish people should stop growing, right? That was the whole idea of Shibud Mitzrayim. The hard work in Mitzrayim was that the Parah was worried that the Jewish people would grow to become such a big nation and overpower them, and specifically at that time Miriam was born, and she was called Miriam because of this difficult pain of the time, mirror. And it was in her merit that the Jewish people were redeemed from this bitterness, and therefore she is also one of the redeemers, along with Moshe and Aaron. And the Rebbe point explains in the footnote, we see how Miriam was a leader in this specific area, and a redeemer for the women at the time. Explains in Shir HaShirim, Rabbah, in the Midrash and Shir HaShirim, that Miriam and Yocheved were the midwives. They were called Shifra and Pua. They were the midwives of the Jewish women, and they guided them and encouraged them and led them through this difficult time when their hearts were weakened from the decree of Parah to kill all the baby boys. And Miriam and her mother took care of the women who were giving birth, and they took care of the babies, and in their merit they were given the schos of mothering the Kahanim and the Leviim. Yocheved was the mother of the lineage of Kahanim and Leviim, and Miriam was the mother of the lineage of David HaMelech. And David comes from Miriam, and the Geulah comes from David. So we see here a direct way how Miriam is connected with the Geulah, with the Geulah in the future. The Geulah of Mashiach, which will come through the descendants of David, is also coming as a direct result of Miriam and in her zechus. So we see that Miriam is called after the bitterness and the harshness of Galus, and she was a leader for the women at the time and helped them through this hardship, specifically in the area of children. But this seems to be like two opposites coming together. We have Goyal Zu Miriam, that Miriam is the redeemer, and Miriam al Shem HaMirror, Miriam is called because of the bitterness of the Galus. So which one is it? Is she a person who's bitter over Galus, or is she a redeemer and a leader and someone who brings about redemption? So the point is that the Geulah comes about because she felt the great pain and bitterness over the Galus. And this is what we're going to learn about in this section, and the lesson that we learn from Miriam and her bitterness that brings about the greater joy for the redemption. So in order to understand why Miriam and the women had a greater joy in their song and their praise of Hashem at Kriyas Yamsuf, let's take a look at what the Chacham say in the Gemara in Megillah on the pasuk Vayikach Miriam Hanavia Achas Aaron. So the Gemara says she's referred to here as the sister of Aaron and not the sister of Moshe, even though Moshe was the leader at the time. But she's referred to the sister of Aaron because she prophesied before Moshe was born, when she was only the sister of Aaron. And her prophecy was that my mother is going to have a child who will, in the future, save the Jewish people. And when Moshe was born, Miriam saw, it was true that her mother had a son, and she expected that this son is going to be the redeemer of the Jewish people when he grows up. And then they had to put Moshe in the river, and they didn't know what's going to become of him. And her father stood by and tapped her on the head and said, "My daughter, where's your prophecy?" And that's why the pasuk in Shemais says, his sister stood from afar to know what will become of her. What will happen? Sorry, to know what will happen to him. In other words, Miriam was standing by and watching what's going to happen to my prophecy. So Miriam had a prophecy about the Geulah, about redemption and salvation of the Jewish people. And from that time, she was anticipating with longing eyes, when will her prophecy be fulfilled? As long as the gullus continued, she was in pain over the gullus. She was bitter over the gullus, to the point that it was expressed in her name, Miriam al Shem HaMirror. Her name was bitter because she was so bitter, and she didn't accept the state of gullus, because she knew that there's going to be a Geulah, there's going to be a redemption. She had a vision for the future, and she had a vision for what will be that the Jewish people are not supposed to be in this situation, and they're going to get out of it. And therefore she was never complacent in Gullus, and therefore she was constantly bitter over it. And it was because of that bitterness and because of that lack of complacence with the Gullus that she was able to constantly be longing and anticipating to Geulah, to the redemption, to the time when they will go out of Mitzrayim. And in that merit, they were redeemed. And that's why when they came out of Mitzrayim and they crossed the sea and they saw all the Egyptians dead on the banks of the river, she felt that greater and a much greater and intense joy, because she saw her prophecy was fulfilled and everything that she was holding on to all the time was finally realized. We see this idea of the desire and longing for the Geulah, bringing it about, also by Rachel Imenu. And interestingly, there points out a footnote that in Tanya explains that Knesset Yisrael, the source of the Jewish people, the source of Jewish neshamas, is called Rachel. Like it says in Tanya and in other places, it says Vayishak Yaakov LeRachel, V'yisas Kailei Vayev Ki Rachel Hi Knesset Yisrael. Right, in Parshas Vayetze, Yaakov met Rachel and he starts to cry. He raises his voice and cry. He kissed her and he cries. So in Kabbalah and Chassidus, it explains on a deeper level why is Yaakov kissing Rachel and crying. He's connecting with Knesset Yisrael, the source of the neshamas, and drawing mercy upon them. So Knesset Yisrael is a term for the Jewish people and the neshamas of the Jewish people in their source, and it's also a feminine term. And earlier in the Sicha, when we were speaking about the Jewish people and as in a relationship with Hashem, as the wife of Hashem, and we were referring to the Jewish people very often there with the term Knesset Yisrael. And this is a reference to the Jewish people in the feminine form, and also the Rebbe indicated there specifically to the Jewish women. So we see Rachel is connected with that feminine aspect of Jewish people, and we see by Rachel this idea also of a longing and desire for the Geulah, which is a merit for it to come. Where do we see this? So in Rashi, in Parashas Vayechi, Rashi explains that when the Jewish people were being exiled from Eretz Yisrael, Rachel went out from her grave and cried and begged Hashem to have mercy on them. Like it says in the Navi Yirmiyahu, Kol berama nishma, etc. Rachel mevakal baneha ma'ina lehinachim v'akadosh baruch hu meshiva yishchar lepulasech num Hashem, etc. V'shavu banim legvulam. A voice goes out on high, is heard on high. Rachel is crying for her children, and she refuses to be comforted. And Hashem responds, there is a reward for your action, and your children will be returned to their borders. So the Rebbe gives an explanation of this Rashi. He explains it a little bit more in depth with a very important lesson for the women as mothers. and we will explain that. We will go into that more in detail at the end of this when we finish the rest of this this section we're going to talk about, but I'll just quote it in short. The Rebbe gives an explanation of this Rashi. It's the Sicha Chelek Lamed, detailing that it was Rachel's choice to be buried there on the way, on outside on the road, and not in Maras Machpelah with Yaakov and with the other Avos and Imahos, specifically because she wanted to be there for her children when they were being exiled, to daven for them, and to beseech on their behalf. And it was in this chos specifically that she chose to be buried there, and she gave up her opportunity to be in Maras Machpelah for the sake of her children, that she got this promise from Hashem that they will be returned, they will be redeemed. And it's also interesting to point out, the Rebbe points out in a footnote, that the Geulah is through David HaMelech, right? We know that the Malach HaMashiach is going to be from the house of David. And the Avos are, it explains in the Zohar, that the Avos are what's called a Merkava, a chariot for Hashem. A chariot has 4 legs, or 4 supports. The Avos are 3, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and David is the 4th leg of this Merkava, of this chariot for Hashem. And this is also the Indian of Rachel. Rachel is also referred to as the 4th leg of the chariot. I think it's in Oirei Or. Explains that Ir is the Rashi Teves Aleph Yud Yud Reish, which refers to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Rachel, Merkava Shlema, a complete chariot. So in one place it mentions David as the 4th leg of the chariot, and in another place it mentions Rachel as the 4th leg of the chariot, because essentially Rachel and David are connected. They're both the Rachel is the one who davened for and brought about the merit of the Geulah, and David HaMelech is the one who is also the source of the Geulah of Malach HaMashiach. So that's just an interesting connection there as well. Now going back to Miriam, we explained that the degree of her great bitterness over the Galus was the degree of her great simcha for the Geulah, right? Like we said earlier in Parkei Avos, Lefum Sara Agra, according to the pain is the reward, because she had such a great pain and bitterness over the Galus, and she did not become complacent with the Galus. That is why she had a greater joy with along with instruments and dancing when they were praising Hashem after Kriyas Yamsuf. And this is why the pasuk about Miriam by Shiras Hayam, when it mentions her coming to sing this praise of Hashem, it specifically refers to her nevuah. It says Vatikach Miriam Hanavia achos Aaron, because it was when the Yidden saw the Mitzrayim dead on the banks of the river, on the banks of the sea, of the Red Sea, of the Yamsuf, their fear of Mitzrayim was gone. The nevuah of Miriam was now completely fulfilled. So they had a complete joy in the Geulah, in the redemption, with instruments, with dancing, because that is when they saw the complete fulfillment of Miriam's nevuah, that they are going to be redeemed. And it's interesting that the Rebbe points out also a reference to Lakotei Sichas Chelek Zayin, where the Rebbe explains that it was specifically on Shvi'i Shel Pesach, after Kriyas Yamsuf, that the Jewish people, that they had their complete redemption, even though they left the place of Mitzrayim 7 days earlier. At that point, they left Mitzrayim, but they still had a fear of Mitzrayim. They were still scared of the Egyptians. There were spies and officers of the Egyptians who left with them to keep an eye on them, and Pare and his army still existed, but they were only fully free when they saw the Mitzrayim dead on after the Kriyas Yamsuf. Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meis al Sfas Hayam. They saw the Egyptians dead on the banks of the sea, and that's when they were fully free, because they were free of any fear of Mitzrayim. And so that's the time when Miriam's nevuah was fully fulfilled, and when she was able to sing with a complete joy and praise for Hashem, much more so than the men. So here we see how the Jewish women had a greater had a greater praise for Hashem and a greater joy in the redemption, more so than the men, because of the pain over the Geulah, that they did not allow themselves to become complacent with the Geulah. They were constantly anticipating for the fulfillment of Miriam's prophecy, and that is what brought them to merit the ultimate their freedom. So that's the end of this section of the Sicha, section 4. And as I said earlier, I'm just going to learn with you the Sicha. The Rebbe explains of what was so unique about Rachel in her devotion to the Jewish people, and in crying out for their sake to be returned to the land to their homeland, to Eretz Yisrael. So and the next section, section 5 in the Sicha, we're going to learn about the connection of this whole idea of the superiority of the Jewish woman and the Geulah in connection with the Haftarah of the Shira of Devorah. All right, so Likutei Sichos Chelik Lamed, page 236. The Rebbe teaches that Rachel did not lose out for the sake of the good of her children, because it was we're talking about the Geulah of her children that she's advocating for. So this is for her good and her fortune. Certainly Rachel agreed and demanded that she be buried there on the road. This is why Rashi quotes Yesh schar lepulasech num Hashem. There's a reward for your action, but he doesn't say what the action is. There are some other commentaries and opinions that explain that the action was that she gave the simanim to Leah, that she gave up her opportunity to marry Yaakov by telling Leah so that Leah wouldn't be embarrassed. So Leah can marry Yaakov, and that was her merit. However, Rashi doesn't mention that here, because here the merit that she had was this act itself, the fact that she chose to be buried on the side of the road and to lose out her opportunity to be in Maras Machpelah, so that she can be there for her children. In other words, Rachel asking for mercy for her children to be returned from the Galus, has the power to bring the promise that they will be redeemed and returned to their land. And in that zechus of this act of giving up her place in Maras Machpelah in order to be there to help them, that is the special, and that's the zechus that brought about that promise. And this special quality of Rachel Imenu, the Ikeres Habayis, that she forgoes on her personal completion and advantage, the advantage of being buried in Maras Machpelah together with Yaakov Avinu, in order to help her children who are many, many generations later, and who are in a low state. They're on their way into exile. These are these are people that sinned, that are deserving to go into exile. Rachel Imenu gave up her zchus to be buried with Yaakov, which is something that has is in effect for thousands of years until Tchias Mesim. She's done this in order to be there to help her children, and this is the reason why she received this promise from Hashem that they will be returned. She gave up of herself for her children, regardless of their situation, regardless of what state they were in. And because of that intrinsic connection that a mother has with her children, because of the intrinsic connection that a mother has with her children, regardless of who they are and what they've been through and what they've done, she's there for them. And Midah connected Midah, Hashem said, I'll do the same. Regardless of what they're doing, regardless of what they're up to, they will be returned, they will come home. In the Geulah Mitzvah Shlema, may it be taken from Miyad Mamish. We should all come back home to our holy land, Eretz Yisrael, and be together. The Geulah Mitzvah Shlema, taken from Miyad Mamish. And that is the powerful lesson that I think we can, as women, as mothers, the Ikeres Habayis, to really recognize that intrinsic connection that we have to our children, to every Jew, to give of ourselves for their sake. And really connected Midah, Hashem should act with us in the same way. Thank you for joining, and I hope you join with us in our next section, 5, as we continue to learn about the awesome greatness of the Jewish women and their connection with the Geulah.